Look, I get it. The college football season might be over, but we are definitely psychos. We're sickos. We can't get enough of college football, which is why you tune in every Sunday to hear me talking nonsense about everything that goes on in the SEC. Welcome on into SEC Unfiltered Sunday Funday. I'm your host, Cole Thompson, and today we break down really a ton of things that are going on. Top duos in the conference going into 2025, early win totals for next year, who are the best bets to go ahead and make. Also, Shane Beamer gets a brand new contract extension. What do we make of it? In Tennessee, are we all okay out in Knoxville right now? Because I see a lot of moaning about things that really don't make a lot of sense at this point. But real quickly, make sure that you like the video, hit the ring notification, and subscribe to the channel because we talk college football every single day. Make sure that you also download the podcast version of the show, wherever you get your podcast listening systems. It's free. It takes 2 seconds. Follow us on the socials, link in the description. Follow me at Mr. Cole Thompson, and check out all of our great work found at SECUnfiltered.com. As always, Sunday Funday is fueled by FanDuel. Visit FanDuel.com/SECU to join today and get started with $300 in bonus bets when you put your first $5 bet down and win. So if you win on your first $5 bet, you get $300 in bonus bets. What's not to love about the bonus bets that are coming on in? Go visit FanDuel.com/SECU. Get $300 in bonus bets when you play and win your first $5 bet. So college football season's come to a close. Good job. We made it through. Unfortunately, the SEC did not punch its ticket to the national championship. Don't worry. We'll get back there next year. We all know what's going to happen that way. But we do have the early win totals. Now, some of these win totals that I'm about to show you are on different websites. I want to give a shout out to Chris Marler for this graphic. We are also going to be using the FanDuel win totals going into 2025. So here we go. 10.5, Texas and Georgia. 9.5, Tennessee. 9, Ole Miss and Alabama. 8.5, LSU. 8, Texas A&M. Kind of at this point feels like a long-winding joke. 7, Oklahoma. 6.5, Florida and South Carolina, and 5.5 Auburn. So let's go through and rank for my money. What is the best order of who I think is absolutely going to hit the win total? Number one has got to be Auburn. Auburn is spending money like no one's business in the transfer portal. And I've been very cohesively critical of Auburn over the last few years. I know what the actual expectations are. I understand what is the goal whenever you're out on the plains. And I know that if you go 8-4, they're not going to sugarcoat it. It's not a good year. But Auburn's been trending in the right direction in terms of what they have in the portal and what they have in recruiting. Just landed Jackson Arnold, brought in Eric Singleton at wide receiver, revamped the offensive line. Last season, they were very aggressive in adding in offensive pieces in the portal. This season, my bad, recruiting trail. This season, very aggressive in adding defensive pieces. So everything is there for Hugh Freeze to go ahead and kind of turn that corner and put themselves on the pedestal of at least guaranteeing 7-5. You look at their schedule too, it's very manageable. The month of October is a little challenging. Games against Arkansas, games against Missouri, games against Georgia. That's kind of where you can say, well, if we struggle, that's fine. But if you start off the year with a win over Baylor, you get a win against Oklahoma, you close out the year with wins over Mercer and Kentucky and Vanderbilt, you're already at 5. You really can't tell me that with a new quarterback coming on in, not as many turnovers, still a very solid offensive personnel group. Even though you lost your star running back, you can't find a 6 win. Just one, I think it's a little bit crazy. Number 2 for me is South Carolina. Death taxes, doubting Shane Beamer every single offseason. Vegas, you think you would learn at some point, but clearly it's not in the cards for you. Because every single year since 2021, minus 2023, Shane Beamer has not only hit the over on the win total, he's hit it by double. So in 2021, with Zeb Nolan as a starting quarterback, they got to 6 wins. In 2022, they got to 8 wins. In 2024, they got to 9 wins. And every single year, you expect them to take that step back, and they never do. The transfer portal additions, very strong. The recruiting additions, very strong. Returning talent, Josiah Thompson, Lenora Sellers, what you bring back in Nick Harbor, Josh Stewart, not to mention Dylan Stewart, my apologies, Jalen Kilgore on the outside. Everything is there for Shane Beamer's squad to once again punch its ticket to a 9-win season. So I'm always going to take South Carolina whenever they give me the under, especially when I know that 7 wins is absolutely within play. Next up, I'm going to go with LSU. LSU has been the biggest winner in the transfer portal period. Full mic drop. When you look at their odds, however, on FanDuel, which is a little bit different than what we see currently right now on the graphic, they're at 8.5. So it's a little bit more. Oh, wait, I guess they are actually the same. This is going to be a very talented group of playmakers coming back on offense. It's like You caught the wind of what was the roller coaster of emotions out in Baton Rouge last season. For my money, there was just too much inconsistency defensively, with the passing, with the play calling from Joe Sloan, and ultimately it led to a 9-4 finish, which again, it's a bad year when you really break it all down compared to what the standards are down in Baton Rouge. But you get Garrett Nussmeier back. And whether or not you want to admit that Garrett Nussmeier had his faults, look at your quarterback room if he were to go to the NFL draft and Bryce Underwood still committed to Michigan. Do you feel like that's a team that's anywhere near 9 wins? Better get 10 wins, dark horse to make the college football playoff. Oh, and all the players that you added on in this offseason, guys like Barian Brown, guys like Nick Anderson, guys like Bauer Sharp, all to help out with the offense. Do you think that they're going to stick around for the long term? They actually are committed to the Tigers mentality. No, they want to go play with the guy that they actually believe can better their odds, and that's why they are in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Plus, the defense is going to be a lot better. They've added in ample talent. You bring in Sadir Mitchell. You bring in Tamarcus Cooley. You bring in multiple other defensive backs. It should be a much more stable secondary. Scheduling, got to start off on the right foot. You cannot find a way to drop another season opener, whether it be in Death Valley or not. And the Death Valley that we know is all fake because Dabo Swinney likes to call it that. But still, you can't drop that game and still expect to be in that 10-win total. But I look at LSU and I say to myself, it's a veteran talent. You've done a good job of replacing what is lost in the portal. You've done a good job of elevating your wide receiver room. Your defense should be better year 2 underneath your defense coordinator, Blake Baker. You have back Harold Perkins. You have back Whit Weeks. You have better front 7 players. You know what the system is and you know what the expectations are. Why would I be doubting a team like LSU not to be able to reach its peak? And by the way, Brian Kelly, if you didn't have that $50 million buyout, if you did not get to that 9-win total, I think you'd be hightailing on and out there and firing up the actual resume pretty soon. Let's go with Georgia next up, 10.5 wins. It feels like a lot. I understand where you come from, but let's go ahead and say at the same time, Alabama is now coming to Athens this year. Alabama is going to be playing in Sanford Stadium. So we already know for that resume, that at least gives you, I think, a certain advantage, the way that Alabama had it last year in Bryant-Denny Stadium. On top of that, you have Texas coming to Athens next year. The other question is that do you feel better about your wide receiver room? This was the team that won the SEC in 2024 and yet still led the country in drops. They didn't rank top 20 in any single metric. Offensively, defensively, they were outrushed by every single opponent this year besides 2. That's how bad it was down in Athens, and yet here they are still punching their ticket to the college football playoff and guaranteeing themselves a spot in the quarterfinals with the first-round bye. You have a good quarterback in Gunnar Stockton, and if he doesn't work out, you still have RP waiting in the wings. You like your running back system, especially with Nate Frazier coming back on in. You upgrade at wide receiver. I think Zachariah Branch and Noah Thomas, they're perfect yin and yangs. Things that work for one, work for the other. Things that struggle with one absolutely won't struggle for the other. So you pair that together along with returning talents like Dylan Bell and Oscar Delp. Plus, I think a more stable offensive line, because if you're going to have to get better play in the trenches, it's very hard for me to doubt that they cannot get to 10 wins. Now, 10.5, that feels like it'll be a big stretch. When you look at FanDuel's odds for them right now going into the season, they have them at 9.5 wins. So going off of FanDuel's odds, you're telling me that a 10-2 season is on the horizon? It's Kirby Smart. It's Glenn Schumann. It's this defense. They always find a way to get the job done. I'm not doubting them anytime soon, and let's be real. Neither should you. Next up, let's talk about Texas A&M. Here's the reason why I have Texas A&M in my rankings in my top 5. 8-4 is almost always expected, and the total is 8. So we look at Texas A&M. They brought in better wide receivers. Casey Concepcion comes on in. Mario Craver comes on in. You also added Micah Hudson, who, according to people that I've spoken to around the program, I understand there's a little bit of doubt. He is expected back at some point this year, so you have him back in the wings. That's another positive. You also still have a stable defense. Cassius Howell, if you remember the Bowling Green transfer, kind of took over games late in the year and proved to the world, hey, I know we're losing Shamar Stewart. Shamar Turner's gone. Nick Scorton was a 1-year rental. I'm not. I'm buying into the stock. So I feel pretty good about where the defensive line is. Not to mention you bring in Torian York. He was one of the better linebackers in college football last year. You still have an identity when it comes to your defensive secondary. I know the explosive plays were allowed left and right. I understand that there were too many big-time grabs by wide receivers. The USC game, Las Vegas Bowl, one that you just want to shield your eyes, kind of drink about it, fit the jack, and then say, you know what? Never again am I coming near this place. Never again am I coming near that level. But it did upgrade. You brought in Julian Humphrey. It's another year with Bryce Anderson. You also have several young up-and-comers coming on in from the recruiting class this past year. Terry Bussey is going to play both ways potentially this season, and he was a phenomenal athlete coming out of high school. So who's to say he can't be CB1 by the end of the year? So I look at all that, and I look at Texas A&M, and I know 8-4 is usually the expectation. 8-4 is usually what we can expect from Texas A&M. And you're giving me 8 wins. So all I have to do is hit the 8. You can lose to Missouri and South Carolina and Texas and drop a game to Notre Dame. And you know what? You still went out. Well, you're 8-4. You did exactly what we expect you to do and what we've been saying for years. And for Mike Elko, 8-4 is certainly not the expectations down in College Station. But for the betting odds total, I don't understand why you would ever want to lean any other way. And last but certainly not least, I want to talk about Texas. Texas win total, according to FanDuel, not by this graphic, is at 9.5. I think a lot of people are doubting Texas, and they're trying to find reasons to say regression is on the horizon. I hate to break it to you, folks. No, it's not. Number 1 recruiting class just came on in. They landed 4 players that were number 1 at their respective positions, including the top wide receiver in the state. They also have 2 young up-and-comers like Jamie French waiting in the wings. You have Ryan Wingo getting another year in the system where he was pretty phenomenal when they utilized him, and DeAndre Moore back in. Spare me with the drops. When he was on point, especially in that Arizona State game, setting the tone early on in the quarterfinals, that's the version of number 0 that I want to see making plays. And the defense alone is still one of the best in college football. That's a testament to what PK and what Johnny Nansen have done for the last several years, because it's the development of talent. It's the identity that they have. Hey, you have to play a certain brand of football down in the 40 acres if you want to last, if you want to be a part of our system moving forward. And what did they do? Well, you have Mookie Taft back. You still have Anthony Hill. Trey Moore said, you know what? I think that the NFL can wait another year for me. I want to go ahead and play for PK one more time. Colin Simmons, guess what? He was phenomenal as a pass rushing specialist, played less than 50% of snaps per game, and he was top 10 in almost every single defensive metric. Yeah, he's going to have a bigger role next year. You bring in Travis Shaw from UNC. You also still have very good up-and-coming linebackers waiting in the wings. Malik Muhammad's going to have another big-time role in this secondary. So add all that together, yes, you were losing names, losing to Vernon Broughton, losing an Alfred Collins, losing multiple offensive pieces. Guys like Silas Bolden in special teams, guys like Matthew Golden, Isaiah Bond, no more Gunnar Helm. But you still have an identity and a persona. And best of all, you got Arch. And now there's no more wondering if Arch does this, that will be good. If Arch changes this type of mentality, this is what we could have seen. No, you'll have it all on display next year, ladies and gentlemen. Those who are saying, well, if Arch would have played a little bit in this game, we would have, okay, well, now he's QB1. So now you get to see what Arch really is. And it's year 3 in the system. There's very little left for AJ Milwee and for Steve Sarkisian to teach the number 16. I think he's going to be here for the long run. You know anything about the Manning family, they buy into people. They love programs. It's great to be a part of the SEC. It's great to be a part of what was going on in Hotty Toddy Land. It's great of what was going on at Rocky Top. But they buy into people. Steve Sarkisian is the person who sold the idea of turning out into one of the best college football quarterbacks to Arch Manning. And it's 3 years of knowing the system. And you're telling me at 9.5, they can lose 2 games and still find a way to punch their ticket to the college football playoff, maybe even Atlanta. Let's say they lose to Georgia and randomly Ohio State, and they run the table throughout the SEC, which they very well can, and I will be very shocked if they don't. You're going to tell me that you wouldn't take that and call it easy money? I don't know what you're saying. Texas is not going away, guys. Texas is only getting started down on the 40 acres. And by the way, the new norm of now with that SEC logo attached to their plate, attached to their chest, that's going to carry a little bit more water than you want to admit when it comes to the actual recruiting. They just finished number 1 in the country. I guarantee you next year, they're not going to fall below the top 3. But those are the teams I absolutely think you got to bet on. Georgia at 9.5, Texas at 9.5, A&M at 8, South Carolina, LSU at 8.5, Auburn at 5.5, and South Carolina at 6.5. If there's one team that I was to bet against taking the under on, I want to get this out of the way now. Not trying to be the villain here, because we're going to talk about this team in a minute. We are. But I do have my hesitations on Tennessee, not only on this graphic here, but also at FanDuel. Tennessee comes in with 9.5 wins. I think Tennessee can absolutely still have the same identity, mantra, and poise to go right back to the college football playoff. They haven't done a lot in the transfer portal, but I do like some of the moves that they did bring in. They brought in Wendell Moe, the offensive lineman. He's going to be your new left guard. Sam Pendleton comes on in from Notre Dame. He started 7 games last year. Probably going to fix your right guard spot. David Sanders is going to be your starting right tackle because he's a 5-star phenom, and if he can't beat out Lance Hurd, you're not keeping him on the bench. He is playing right away. So I think the offensive line will be better. But when you don't have that secondary punch, and right now we don't know what it is going to be. It could end up panning out. But when you don't have that secondary punch on offense, whether it's a go-to wide receiver and a stable run game, or a quick strike passing attack and good third down communication, it's really challenging to believe that you're going to turn the corner. Also, there were multiple games last year where kind of Tennessee lucked out. And that's not an insult. Tennessee earned their right to the college football playoffs. So I want to make that abundantly clear. And I think that Nico Iamaleava is going to turn the corner next year. And we're going to be talking about him the way that we probably should have been in 2024, only in 2025. But I have my reserves. The defense is losing multiple talents, including James Pierce, including Keelan Peely, including multiple defensive backs. They are losing several offensive linemen. They are losing multiple running backs. And more importantly, they're losing their best asset in Dylan Sampson, who for my money still got duped out of not being a Doak Walker Award finalist. You're asking a lot of Nico to turn the corner. You're asking a lot for him to be that much more complete, that much further ahead in his process, his mental mentality, his makeup, his persona. And you're asking a lot of your wide receivers to step on up. Is that going to work out in the swamp when you play Florida, a team that you had to go to overtime against? Is that going to work when you go to Lexington against a Kentucky squad who may at that point of the year really have nothing to lose? You lost to Arkansas last season. Is Arkansas going to come on into Neyland and pull off the upset? What about Georgia? What's going to happen in that game? What games are you sitting here and saying, okay, guaranteed win? If you tell me that right now Tennessee finds their way to get to 10 wins, absolutely would buy it. If you're telling me to go ahead and take the 9.5, I would be cautiously hammering the under. Because here's the deal. That 9.5 means I got to get 10 wins. I think that 9-3 is 100% on the table for Tennessee next year. I think absolutely they should be, without a doubt, at 9-win team. But it's that half, which means I got to lean forward a little bit, which means I got to go ahead and trust that one game that probably ended with just a little bit of luck ends up actually closing out on their terms. But that's the only one that I would say I have a little bit of hesitation on when it comes to bang the under. Oklahoma, I can get behind it. Yeah, I can probably get behind it when it comes to Florida. I can probably get behind it when it also comes to maybe even Alabama or Ole Miss for that matter. But 9.5, that line is just really, really, really rocky. I got to see more from the wide receiver room. I am excited, though, to see what happens this spring. Absolutely. Let's get a sip of water real fast. All right, let's go. Duos in college football. So, real quickly, if you're watching this live, make sure that you go ahead and like the video, hit the ring notification, and subscribe to the channel. It takes like all of 2 seconds. And by the way, this is free for you. We're not behind a paywall. We're going to stay this way for a while, and we are on the race to 20,000 subscribers before the end of the month of January. So, if you just tell your friends and family about it, we greatly appreciate it. More importantly, you will probably be able to say at the end of the day, you were here from the very get-go. Okay, duos in the SEC going into 2025. When I break down my way too early top 25 rankings, what I try to do is I try to find duos, 2 people, 2 prospects that I think elevate your team. They're either on offensive side, defensive side. It doesn't really matter when it comes to that. They are just 2 guys to where you say, if you plug and play them in any other team, whether it was in Auburn, whether it was in LSU, whether it was in Columbia, South Carolina, Norman, Oklahoma, they would guarantee you 3 more wins. That's how much I believe in them. That's how much I believe they can turn the corner. That's how highly I regard them. So I got my top 5 going into next year. Real quickly, honorable mentions. Vanderbilt quarterback Diego Pavia and Eli Stowers. Auburn wide receiver Cam Coleman and Kendrick Falk. Alabama wide receiver Ryan Williams and LT Overton at defensive tackle. And Texas A&M linebacker Torian York and Cassius Howell at defensive end. Number 5, I got Ole Miss's Caden Lee and linebacker Surtain Perkins. Lee was one of the most slept-on wide receivers in college football last year, and certainly in the SEC, because all of us were so fixated on what Jordan Watkins can do and what we thought Juice Wells was going to be. And then Trey Harris is off to such a hot start before he gets injured. And slowly, I bet you didn't know this, but Caden Lee finished top 10 last year in every single receiving category among SEC wide receivers. Top 10 in catches with 57. Number 10 in receiving yards with 874. Number 5 in yards per catch at 15.3. And 7th in yards per game at 86.6. When Jackson Dart needed a big time play in the Florida game or in the Mississippi State game or especially in the Duke game in the Gator Bowl, 19 was making plays, and that's going to do wonders when it comes to fitting in that role for Austin Simmons next year. He's one of those playmakers that you say, he would be a wide receiver 2 for most teams, but if you put him as a wide receiver 1, we are very confident in what his skill set is, what his potential can be, what his upside is. He may end up leading our team in receiving yards, and he's very well going to do that next year, I think, down at Oxford. And then you bring in Perkins. Perkins, again, rotational guy that understood his assignment in the defense headline by Pete Golding Jr. Number 3 in sacks in the SEC with 10.5. Number 4 in the SEC in tackles for losses with 14. Number 3 among linebackers in quarterback hits, pressures, and win ratio, according to Pro Football Focus. Also had 3 pass breakups, and he averaged somewhere like around 6.2 tackles per game. He had multiple games last season where it was over, where he had over 10 tackles per stop. So he is the enforcer of your defense moving forward. He is the guy that you say, you know what? We know that if we get him flying around the football field, he's going to make plays. We are salivating at the mouth to be able to watch him play in Vaught Hemingway Stadium next year. I don't understand why people are doubting Ole Miss. They still have some very good talent. They've added in a lot of pieces in the portal. They did a good job of stabilizing themselves to where maybe they aren't going to have that same type of mentality where it's win or bust because of what we lost, but we still feel really, really good about where we are as a program. Number 4, but that was number 5. Number 4, Tennessee quarterback Nico Iamaleava and defensive back Jermod McCoy. It's another year in Heupel's system that should do wonders for a team that was in the college football playoff. By the season's end, if you go back and you look, Nico actually had figured things out. He wasn't overshooting wide receivers. He wasn't playing under duress. He was getting rid of the ball in a timely manner. He actually was one of the better and more efficient quarterbacks over the last 5 games following the Alabama win in the third Saturday in October. The problem is Tennessee just never played a 4-quarter game, whether it was the inconsistency with the pass protection, wide receivers dropping balls left and right. There were a few turnovers from Nico. The running ability on third down really struggled. So we kind of threw Nico to the wayside last season. But it's Josh Heupel's system. You got to see him take another step forward. You got to see him be able to kind of embrace who he is. And I don't have any doubts about Nico. I still believe that he could be one of the best quarterbacks in college football. In my way too early quarterback rankings, I had him 6th. And this is a guy that didn't finish with 3,000 passing yards. He barely finished with 3,000 total yards of offense last year. So I have my reserves when it comes to Tennessee, but I don't have my reserves when it comes to Nico. You put him in certain systems, very similar to the one that he's running in Josh Heupel's, he's probably a 10-win team quarterback, and he's probably over a 3,300 passing quarterback, and he probably has 30 touchdowns, and he probably also has a few turnovers, better wide receiver play. There's a lot of reserves that go into what went wrong in Knoxville this past season offensively. But then you bring in Jermod McCoy. And Jermod McCoy, for my money, was probably one of the more quality overall welcomed additions in the SEC. Was a stud at Oregon State for a year, then comes on in and immediately locks down the left side of the field. Took a defense that ranked 64th in pass coverage, allowing over 220 yards per game, to 29th. Less than 190 yards per pass. 13 pass deflections this season were the most by Evolve's defensive back since 2001. It also was number 2 in the SEC, and he also led the conference with 4 interceptions, which was the most since 2019 by Evolve's defender. 3 of his 4 picks also came from inside Tennessee's 3-yard line, which meant that he was causing plays as teams were trying to score. And more importantly, his 90.3 coverage grade by Pro Football Focus ranked 2nd in the SEC and 5th among all cornerbacks. So this is now your go-to guy. This is now your favorite guy. This is now your top moment. This is the dude that you think at this point is going to turn the corner and be an enforcer in the secondary. I absolutely love everything about what Jermod McCoy does. I absolutely love everything that Jermod McCoy brings to the table. I absolutely believe that Jermod McCoy can be one of those playmakers that comes out, starts swinging. And now he's going to have to because of what you're losing inside of the front 7, what you're losing on the defensive line. Tim Banks has himself a stud on the back end. Number 3, LSU quarterback Aaron Nussmeier and linebacker Whit Weeks. So Nuss was an inside the dark roller coaster. And one of you who have been on one of these before, you get what I'm saying. You have no idea what term is coming next. The corkscrews, the twists, the turns, the drops. You're just kind of along for the ride. And when Garrett Nussmeier is playing his version of football that we were envisioning when he came on out of high school, especially being a son of Doug Nussmeier, he was point. He was on point. There was a reason why many people said this guy could win a Heisman Trophy. He eventually could be a number 1 overall pick. He could be one of the best in college football. And you saw it on display. The Texas Bowl, if you're a Tiger fan, has got to give you so much hope and joy and praise and accolades to say, you know what? This is someone that we believe in next year. But unfortunately, you also had the bad, the twists, the turns. Bad performance against Alabama. Very rocky performance against USC. Kind of an up and down performance against Florida. There was a lot of moments this past year where you're saying, that's the reason why he couldn't beat out Jaden Daniels. And let's be real, nobody was beating out Jaden Daniels to begin with. But he's one of 6 passers to finish last season with over 4,000 yards. He's the only passer returning with over 4,000 yards. He's one of 10 players to finish with over 30 touchdowns last season. He's one of 3 players returning with 30 touchdowns this season. It's a much more stable receiving corps. Look at what you're losing. No more CJ Daniels. No more Kyron Lacey. You still have Aaron Anderson. You still have Chris Hilton. You still have Xavier Thomas. You're bringing in Nick Anderson, who was a freshman All-American, and Berrien Brown that is known for pure straight line speed. That is something that you can hold your hat on. And while you lost Mason Taylor, you still have 2 quality tight ends. Your offensive line is going to take a step back, but by how much? Love the additions of what they've been able to bring in. Josh Thompson was an all Big Ten interior offensive lineman. Now he's playing down in Death Valley. That's a dude that's going to be creating avenues for Caden Durham in the run game and making sure that you stay upright. You have enough to say it's another year in Joe Sloan's system. It's another year of confidence to be able to improve. And as long as I continue to make the right plays and the right reads, I'm in a very, very, very good spot moving forward. And then you go talk about Weeks, Honky Badger. Finished second in the SEC in tackles with 122. He was top 20 in tackles for losses with 10. He had 3.5 sacks last year. Constant playmaker. When Harold Perkins went down, somebody had to step on up. That was number 40. Whit Weeks was flying all over the football field. He is now the general of this defense moving forward. Blake Baker has a certain standard that you're trying to hold attached to. What you're looking for is exactly what a guy like Whit Weeks brings. Either he is going to be phenomenal in 2025. More importantly, he is going to be a reason why we would talk about the Tigers making a college football playoff run. Number 2. Now, number 2 and number 1, I'm going to be completely real. You can interchange these, and I completely understand it. But for my money, it is a little different. For my money, there's one small caveat that I had to throw in here. So number 2 is South Carolina quarterback Lenoir Sellers and defensive end Dylan Stewart. There was no one more improved from week 1 to week 0. From week 1 to week 14 than Lenoir Sellers. Kid was everywhere. Go back and remember that performance against Old Dominion. And then remember what he did against Clemson in the Palmetto Bowl. He's a perfect fit for Mike Shula's system. He was making plays left and right that literally weren't just jaw-dropping. They were unheralded. They were unknown, unbeknownst to me. And that's the big thing, is that you remember when you were a kid and watching Johnny Manziel play and watching Cam Newton play and watching Vince Young play, and you're saying, that's impossible to do. Well, it isn't for number 16 from Florence, South Carolina. Made it absolutely look easy. 3 touchdowns in the game against Clemson to guarantee a spot at least with 9 wins this past year. And I'm not saying that there weren't some lulls, but you know what? For a redshirt freshman, you'll take the lulls as long as the growth continues as soon as the season comes to an end. And by the way, Mike Shula, I refuse to say that Cam Newton and Lenoir Sellers are the same player or even close to the same player. But I will say that if there is one person that can get more versions of that number 2 out of number 16, it is Mike Shula. Because when he won the MVP for the Carolina Panthers, guess who was his offense coordinator? So it makes perfect sense. Finished with over 3,000 scrimmage yards last year, 25 touchdowns, and 4 wins over ranked opponents. And then you throw in Dylan Stewart, who, because of what you had with Kyle Kennard on the opposing side, got to get comfortable, got to get really in motion for Clayton White's system, and eventually played with confidence. And by the season's end, he was looking like more so a 4-year All-American than he was a freshman coming out of high school. Finished the season with 6.5 sacks, 10 tackles for losses, second among SEC freshmen in quarterback hits, pressures, tied with the guy who's at number 1 in forced fumbles. This is somebody that is now the anchor of your defense. It's somebody that when you go into recruiting visits and you step inside a household, you say, look at what we did with Dylan Stewart. Look at how well he played as a freshman. That can be you. And by the way, he's only going to get better. He's an All-American for my money. He's a potential first-round pick. He is the top recruit defensively to come through the building since Jadeveon Clowney. And he might have a little bit more upside and juice than what you have with Jadeveon Clowney. So I really like what he brings to the table moving into 2025. That's number 2. Number 1, and it's, again, by the hair of your chin. If you want to flip them, by all means, so be it. I don't really argue with you on that. It's Arch Manning and it's Colin Simmons from Texas. It's year 3 for Arch in the system. And he's impressed everyone in the building. He's impressed everyone that has been around the block. Those who have barely seen him play still say, Arch, he's good. We know what he's going to be. And here's how you know that, because of literally you have one of the best passers to come through Austin since 2009. And you say to yourself, we need to go ahead and play Arch Manning. That was what Quinn listened to for the last 2 years. Finished the season with 13 total touchdowns against 2 interceptions, several throws that were off point, several throws that were a little bit too wide. One of the interceptions, god awful. But you know what that is? That's correctability. It's getting your feet wet. It's like basically seeing the preview for a movie, then going in and having your mind blown afterwards. You understand so much of what he does can be fixed overnight. And now he's locked into his QB1, so there's no more question about, hey, what's it going to be like? Am I running certain design plays? Am I locked in at this spot? Am I going to be here for the long? No, you're good. And he's not going anywhere. Colin Simmons was everything the Texans expected coming out of Duncanville High School. Finished first among Longhorns in sacks with 9.5, second in tackles for losses with 14.5. Only got 48 tackles as a pass rushing specialist. And I might remind you, ladies and gentlemen, guy did not play more than 50% of snaps in any single game in 2024. So he was a one-down player and a one offensive assignment. Get to the backfield, win your rush, tackle the quarterback, tackle the running back. Mission accomplished, was an All-American freshman. Phenomenal first year. And now he's going to be a 3-down player. And he has lines of defense with Anthony Hill Jr., Mookie Taft coming on back in. Trey Moore's back for another season. Malik Muhammad is back for another year. You could have guaranteed to switch any one of these around and you would have been probably right. But for my money, I just had to say that right now, when I looked at currently the status of what we have with Colin Simmons and how he played, it's just slightly above. If you were to take Dylan Stewart and Arch Manning and put them together, I probably would have it at 2 and have no questions whatsoever. You took Colin Simmons and Lenore Sellers, put them at 1, I'd have no questions whatsoever. But my gut tells me that Colin Simmons is going to take that next step forward right alongside with Arch Manning. And I think that Dylan Stewart and Lenore Sellers are right there. So real quickly, number 1, Texas quarterback, Arch Manning, Colin Simmons. Number 2, Lenore Sellers, quarterback, and Dylan Stewart, defensive end. Number 3, LSU quarterback Garrett Nussmeier and linebacker Whit Weeks. Number 4, Tennessee quarterback Nico Iamaleava and Jamon McCoy. And number 5, Ole Miss wide receiver Caden Lee and linebacker Sarah Tane Perkins. If you guys have any questions, or if you guys want to give me your top 5, go ahead and let me know in the comment section down below. I would love to have this back and forth rebuttal with you. That way we can continue to talk about who's right, who's wrong, which teams are actually really, really trending in that right direction. And you know what's going to be trending in the right direction for you is by visiting FanDuel. Because, ladies and gentlemen, I don't know if you know this, today's the last day of actual football being played before the granddaddy of them all, the Super Bowl. And from the first whistle to the final drive, FanDuel it takes the playoffs to the next level. And right now, new customers can bet $5 to get $300 in bonus bets if you win. That's $300 in bonus bets if you win with your first $5 bet. The FanDuel app gives you everything you need, from live bets to same-game parlays and so much more. Plus, when you win, you get paid instantly. So what's not to love? Just visit FanDuel.com/SECU to join today and get started with $300 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com/SECU. Make this playoff an unforgettable one with FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Disclaimer: must be 21 plus in select states. For Kansas, in affiliation with Kansas Star Casino, or 18 plus in DC. First online real money wager only. $5 deposit is required. Bonus issued with non-withdrawable bonus bets, which expires 7 days after receipt. Restrictions apply. See terms at sportsbook.fanduel.com. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit fanduel.com/RG. Call 1-888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org/chat in Connecticut or visit ndgambling in help.org in Maryland. Hope is here. Visit Gambling Helpline ma.org or call 800-327-5050 for 24/7 support in Massachusetts, or call 1-877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY in New York. All right, let me get a sip of water real fast. All right, what do you want us to talk about? Oh, I know what we're going to do. Let's go ahead and talk about South Carolina. So, you guys didn't know this. South Carolina is in first place for my heart for the bandwagon team of 2025. I've made this clear multiple times. I can have my allegiance bought. My allegiance for every season can be bought by a fan base. So South Carolina's been the nicest to me so far. Maybe Texas has got to pick up the pace. Maybe A&M's got to pick up the pace. But until further notice, sorry, I'll lean with the Gamecocks. South Carolina just offered a brand new contract to Shane Beamer. So Beamer, after a 9-4 season, is getting a deal that will carry him through 2030. The deal will be worth $8 million per year with $100,000 in raises annually. He was going to make about $6.6 million this past year. The deal also includes a $5 million buyout if Beamer leaves South Carolina this season, which drops by $1 million per year due to the contract. So the question that I have is, after going 9-4 this year, losing in the bowl game, but yet still finding a way to get to 9-4, was this the right deal? And honestly, if you say anything other than 100% yes, I have no idea what you're talking about. There are so many reasons why this is just the perfect fit for both what's needed at Willie B and for Beamer long-term. Let's start off with the fact that he's beaten the win total every year since 2023. In 2021, he did it with a reserve quarterback that had already medically retired from football and said, I want to go into coaching. They didn't have a quarterback. They said, hey, Zeb Nolan, can you take a couple reps? Yes, sir. And by the way, they got to 6-6 in the regular season. A year later, they bring in Spencer Rattler, and the culture continues to change. And then a year later, unfortunately, due to injuries, they weren't able to get over the hump. But then this past year, wins to close out the season. He's beaten the win total every single year by at least 2. And he said at the very beginning of the year, you can go ahead and doubt us all you want. You can go ahead and tell us that we're going to finish 11th or 12th or 13th, whatever you have in your preseason rankings, and we already know that you're lying. We know how good we are. Since he's arrived on campus, he has been the absolute epitome of consistency. 29-22 records since taking over the Gamecocks. It's the best record by a South Carolina coach in his first 4 seasons. In his first 4 seasons, he's also played spoiler in the SEC. He knocked out Tennessee and Clemson back-to-back weekends for the college football playoff in 2022. And in both games, they were dominant performances with Spencer Rattler, the offense, and his son identity defensively. You also saw this past year, if Miami wins against Syracuse, they knock Clemson out of the college football playoff conversation. That entire performance that we saw from Cade Klubnik versus Texas, that doesn't exist because if they lost a game they desperately needed to win. And the biggest thing of why this is a huge win for South Carolina, there's a new standard set moving into 2025. Beamer's changed the expectations from people down in Columbia, and they know it's possible because it's obtainable. Think about this for a second. For years, South Carolina has been a very proud program. You talk to any Gamecock, anyone that bleeds the garnet and black, they'll tell you straight up, we demand excellence. And you're right. They should. Every college football program should. But a lot of South Carolina fans are saying, we need to get to 10-4. We need to get to 10-2. And it's like, okay, well, if you do that, that's good. But just be okay if you go 6-6 the next year. Well, that's not going to be the case anymore because Shane Beamer has shown you, no, 9 wins is achievable. And by the way, it's achievable with an offensive line that's going through some rebuild, a solid defense, and a brand new quarterback. Well, the offensive line is going to be good next year. The defense is going to go through a slight rebuild, but not enough to where we can question it, and our quarterback's a year older. South Carolina's 2024 season was a wild card. And if you guys remember back in the offseason, I told you the biggest wild card team of next season was going to be the Gamecocks. And the reason why is because I didn't know what to expect. It's like going to a shop bar and spinning the wheel for $5 where you're already going to get a shot, but you have no idea what it's going to be. Sometimes you're lucky and it lands on Jose Cuervo Tequila Silver. That's the A&M performance. That's the performance against Clemson. That's the dominant game against Vanderbilt, where everything that you see clicks for you. This is the version of South Carolina football that's good enough to be a threat in the postseason picture. And then the shot glass can land on Captain Jack's grape-flavored whiskey. That's the Ole Miss performance. That's the game very early on in the season against Old Dominion. That's the game where you kind of had your struggles and lulls against Illinois. The good news is it was a growing campaign. Did losing to Illinois sting at the end of the year and you didn't get to 10 wins? Yeah, a little bit. Could you blame opt-outs, not having Nicky Manwari for the second half? No Kyle Kennard, no Rocket Sanders? Probably. But you felt so high going into that game that the level of depression afterwards, knowing what should have been, it fuels you. Did losing to LSU sting because of one officiating bad play, which, yes, I'm going to stand on. Nicky Manwari should have been in the end zone, and that should have been enough for South Carolina to punch his ticket to the college football playoff. Absolutely. But also, if Lenore Sellers stays healthy in that game and he doesn't get hurt right before halftime, that's a moot point with this team. They already win that football game for my money, and they punch their ticket to the doesn't dance. But that fire that you felt afterwards, knowing that you were wrong, that this shouldn't have happened. We should be right where that team is. We should be talking about the way that Tennessee is, or the way that Texas is, or the way that even Georgia is, because we delivered on our end of the bargain. Well, that's the fire that you want. It's not a fire, it's called standards. Those are standards that are being met by Shane Beamer, and they are expected inside the locker room. They're expected out on the practice field. They're expected in the film room, under the bench squad, under the squat rack, in the classroom, at fan meet and greets. People internally in the building have these now morals and expectations. People who pay tickets and season tickets expect this to happen now. People who come travel from all across the country that go to Willie B for a Saturday night showcase in one of the ravenous atmospheres in Cathedral of Chaos expect this persona moving forward. And that is the standard. Yeah, you had some standards underneath Will Muschamp, not in this capacity. You had some standards set underneath head football coach, not in this capacity. Steve Spurrier had his moments, but not the way that Shane Beamer does. He also has built an identity, which I think is a really big deal. You hear people talking about buying stock into South Carolina this offseason because what they have returning in Sellers and Stewart. And I'll tell you what, that's a good foundation to have. You throw in Josiah Thompson, you throw in Jalen Kilgore. Those are two other pieces that you look back and say to yourself, man, we got our core four. Nobody can take us down as long as they stay healthy. Sellers' growth from week 1 to week 14 was uncanny. Literally, that happens because if you play with confidence, you play with a pedigree, you play with a mentality, and best of all, you play with a certain approach that you absolutely believe can turn the corner. More importantly, here's the best part. He gained that confidence because of what he was being taught inside that locker room. Who was teaching him? Shane Beamer at the front of the class, preaching the sermon left and right, telling everybody what you need to follow if you want to be a part of the Gamecock mentality. And he's going to come back next year and he's going to play even better. From that moment in the Texas A&M game with the 2 rushing touchdowns and the ability to make defenders miss left and right, until the end of the year, there was nobody more exciting than number 16 on the field. And Stewart's one of the rising stars, and by the season's end, he looked like a player that you could easily say, son, I need you to come up and make a 4th down stop. And he is licking his chops and saying, how quickly do you want me to get it done, sir? Well on his way to becoming a first-round pick. That's culture. When you have young players who are unafraid to deliver in the biggest moments of the year, that's what you see, and that's what we call culture. That's why we say to ourselves, hey, South Carolina, 9-win season next year, it's possible? Absolutely it is. Because of when you have the right mentality inside the building and everyone is breathing the same type of oxygen and they're all sucking in the hype that is 2025, you can't understand how much better it is. But the biggest reason why this deal is worth it for South Carolina has nothing to do with the Norris Sellers, has nothing to do with Dylan Stewart, has nothing to do with the players that are coming on in. It has everything to do with Shane Beamer. He fits Columbia. See, when you go to bigger programs like Alabama or LSU or Texas, Ohio State, Michigan, Florida, Oregon, they can sell themselves. What they have with the resources, what they have with state-of-the-art complexes, what the culture is, what the history of the program says. They can sell themselves to a 5-star recruit. They just need a coach. They need somebody who can be calling the right plays, running the right X's and O's, and putting themselves in a position to where they will achieve greatness. When you're at a place like South Carolina, Ole Miss, West Virginia, Virginia Tech, Missouri, Utah, Syracuse, you don't need a coach. You need a personality. You need somebody who lives and breathes the identity of the program. Somebody who is willing to put their life on the line to sell that school because they believe in the morals and values. That's Shane Beamer. Every single time he opens his mouth and talks about Gamecock football, whether he's frustrated, whether he's excited, whether he's joyous, whether he's mad at the world, he means it. It's not a charade. It's not him trying to sell a player to come on in. This is what you're all about. When he speaks, people listen because they know that he's telling the truth. Every single little detail about a program or about what he envisions for his school or what needs to change, he is fully investing and he's taking ownership for, which a lot of coaches say they do, but I don't know how many will. And it's changing that culture and players are buying into it. And the best part is that when you look at the players that they're bringing in, they have to fit a certain brand of Gamecock football. A little bit unorthodox, maybe a little bit weird, definitely filled with fuel and anger and the hunger and desire to be better and a determination to silence the critics. And if you don't fit that mold, you don't belong out in Cola, South Carolina. You don't belong anywhere near Willie B. And you look at the players being brought in via the portal this year. A lot of people are talking about how there are big-time names going to Texas A&M and LSU. And then you hear about South Carolina. And what's the thing that you hear from those that work in the industry? They fit the culture. They fit the bill. Those are the type of players that Shane Beamer needs to attack. And guess what? They'll be right back at square one in 2025. And lo and behold, we'll be talking about them as probably a 9-10 win team once again. It doesn't matter who are the players. And by the way, a lot of these players, I might also add in, they had offers from major schools. Rasul Faison was not only getting looked at by Columbia, South Carolina. Gabriel Brownlow-Dindy was not only getting looked at by those in Willie B. Brandon Cisse was not getting looked at by only Shane Beamer for an SEC school. There were other schools that want to go after it. Players want to go play for Shane Beamer. I think that's the biggest thing. The culture there is second to none, and they want to learn Beamer ball. And there's also a fact of proof and paternal belief that translates into on-field results. A lot of people get sold mumbo jumbo left and right about what can work, what's supposed to work, what's supposed to turn the corner, how I can get on the field. No, Shane Beamer's got to prove a concept, especially for players that you're still trying to develop. Nick Harbor, remember him? Well, now he's wide receiver 1 going into 2025. Jalen Kilgore now learned how to play multiple positions in his secondary. Lenoris Sellers, kind of an unorthodox quarterback, 6'3", wears the rec specs, but when you give him out in the open field, best of luck trying to bring him down. You need a coach like this. Tennessee did this a few years ago when they brought in Josh Heupel. Guess what? When they landed him, they made the college football playoff, and they've had 2 10-win seasons. Ole Miss needed this right type of culture. Guy on the outside, brash mentality, looking on in. Guess what? Lane Kiffin has 3 10-win seasons, and he's finished in the top AP, top 25 4 different times. Neither school regrets handing out that paycheck, and neither school regrets handing out that extension to keep them away from other teams that might be willing to poach them. And by the way, Beamer's like the 9th highest paid coach in salary. He is worth every single penny and perhaps more down in COLA. The only question is, do you believe that they can turn the corner and get any better in 2025? And then what you have to ask yourself is, okay, well, what's going to be the new asking price to keep Shane Beamer around for the long term? I'm just saying, you can doubt South Carolina all you want, but that culture, everything that we talk about when it comes to the mentality of that, you need that in a guy like Beamer down in Columbia. All right, for those of you who are still watching, just do me a favor. Make sure you like the video, hit the ring notification, subscribe to the channel, tell your friends, family, mortal enemies, best of bros, and everywhere about college football, about what you want to hear. And I want to get your opinion. I would like to do a live show or at least a question Q&A once a week. Is there a day that you guys would really like to do that? Do you have questions? And if so, why not go ahead and follow me at Mr. Cole Thompson on Twitter? That way we can continue to have those conversations. I think that doing the offseason mailbag is a big time deal. And I want to make sure that you guys and your voices are heard. So, Tennessee fans, what's going on again? What's going on out in Knoxville right now? Because I'm hearing a lot of different things from people. Some are very upset that Tim Banks was rehired or given the extension for being the defense coordinator. Some believe that the team underachieved this year. So let's do ourselves a favor. Let's all just take a deep breath together. All right, good. Now we're good. It was a good year in Knoxville. It was a very, very good year in Knoxville. I understand that the final goal was not achieved, but it was a solid season for Josh Heupel and company. Go back to week 1 and tell yourself this. We're going to win 10 games. We're going to beat Alabama and Florida. We're going to lead the SEC in rushing. We're going to finish with a top 10 nationally ranked defense, and we're going to go to the college football playoff. What would you say? Okay, where do I sign up? I mean, we're okay with losing to Georgia. I mean, who's the team that we lose to? Arkansas. Crap. Okay, now I get it. So, I understand why you're upset. There was multiple games that probably you should have won. And then, of course, you have the Ohio State game and how that closed out the year. I'm going to save you the trouble. Nobody was winning that game besides Ohio State. It was a blowout. It wasn't pretty. The way that things ended, it was definitely on a sour note. I completely understand how you feel frustration-wise, but nobody was winning that football game. Not a single soul besides the Buckeyes out in Columbus. And imagine this, if you could, for a second. Say you get Penn State scheduled. Say instead you're now playing SMU week 1 and you're hosting them in Neyland. And then you go play against Boise State. Are you not in the college football playoff semifinals? And then what's the opinion about Tennessee that season? So you got the bad luck of the draw. It happens from time to time. But some Tennessee fans feel like the season wasn't complete. And I completely understand where you come from because of 95% of your team was built off your defense. It was there every single Saturday. James Pierce, Jamon McCoy, what you had at the linebacker spot, defensive tackles were making plays left and right. It was a solid season in pass rush. But then your offense was 50-50 every given week. And it never gave you a 4-quarter performance. And the scary part is that now this unit is a little bit different. You no longer have James Pierce back there. You no longer have the leading rusher of the SEC and Dylan Sampson. you no longer have multiple wide receivers because they all either entered the portal or they all entered the NFL draft. So a little bit different. Tennessee never played a 4-quarter game against P4 competition. That was always off. But I told you guys at the very beginning of the year, said multiple times, let's go ahead, take a deep breath whenever it comes to Nico Iamaleava, which is a big reason why I don't think that I'm putting Arch Manning inside of my top 10 rankings for college football quarterbacks, because I have my reserves about him. We put so much pressure on him that he had to take the next step forward. And by the way, he improved along the way. The last 5 games of the season, phenomenal ending. One of the more consistent, direct quarterbacks, but some fans thought he had to win the Heisman Trophy. Some fans said, oh, he's going to average over 35 points per game. He's going to throw for 4,000 yards. He's going to put himself in a good position to where we're punching our ticket to the playoffs. He's the second coming to Peyton Manning. It's like, okay, well, you've already destined him to fail if he doesn't meet those expectations. For my money as a redshirt freshman, did everything I needed him to do. Show improvements, grow as a passer, prove at the end of the year that he was the right guy. And yeah, there were some faults, but there were faults everywhere because Tennessee never played that 4-quarter game against P4 opponents. The run game was either stalled. Look at what happened in the college football playoff. The passing attack was hit and miss. How many times wide receivers dropped balls? The offensive line was inconsistent. They weren't able to create avenues. They were terrible on third down. The careless penalties. All of those things factored in Knoxville that eventually led Tennessee to finish the year off 10-2, and a little bit of a sour feel by some of those down in the program's culture. So I get it. But still, you look at this team, there were so many other faults that came with it that were out of Nico's control. And I understand when you think about Josh Heupel's offense, you're saying to yourself, we're supposed to be explosive. We're supposed to be taking the tops off of defenses. We're supposed to have elite wide receivers. We had a Biletnikoff winner here 2 years ago. And that's fine. But sometimes it takes a little bit of time. And for my money, I know what people are saying. Oh, we're supposed to be a certain brand of football. No, you're not. You can be whatever brand you want to be. The question is, what brand do you want to be next season? Do you want to be one known like in the 90s when you had guys like Reggie White, and Al Wilson, and Eric Berry, and Leonard Little defensively? Because you still have some of those dudes playing back next year for Tim Banks. Or do you want to be an up-tempo offense? Now, the best thing is, could you have both and meet in the middle? Maybe instead of having a top 10 rushing attack, you have a top 25 rushing attack, but instead of having the 51st ranked pass attack, you have a 30 ranked pass attack. Maybe instead of having the number 1 scoring defense, you have the number 14 scoring defense, but your number 61st pass defense ends up turning into a top 20 pass defense. Maybe it's little things like that to where you meet in the middle and 10-3 is still on the horizon. But you want to be able to be a team that is up-tempo, scores a lot of points, wins with repetition, consistently puts on drives, and defensively you attack the backfield while giving speeds to your DBs to give a breather. And I think all that's possible next year. I still think that Tennessee, with what they have returning, is in a good spot. Remember, this was the deepest defensive line team in college football for 2024. More importantly, you're asking more out of your quarterback and Nico Iamaleava to step on up in 2025. I absolutely think that he can do that, especially with what you have returning at wide receiver. You got to have a second punch. At the end of the day, Tennessee has got to have a second punch because you know what worked for teams like Texas and worked for Ohio State and even somewhat you can throw in Penn State and Notre Dame. They had that second punch where if things go wrong for your offense or things go wrong and something's not working on one side, you can pivot. And if that's possible, who knows how far Tennessee can go. If you can have a good passing attack and a stable run game where a guy like Star Thomas comes on in or Peyton Lewis runs for 250 yards and your offensive passing attack finishes with 250, you'll take that and be content. Maybe instead you got to go ahead and trust that your passing attack one game gets you 375 yards and you're only running for 60. You're okay with that because you have your secondary punch. Nico has to be that secondary punch. And there's a lot to like about Nico. There's a lot to say that he has improved on and more importantly, things that he will continue to improve on. I'm very high on what the season can be. But you got to do those little things different. Things like being able to take that next step forward with the deep ball. Your decision-making's got to step up. Your 3-step drawback, you have to have a better read of the defense. You got to be willing to tuck and run. You got to know your situations. You got to know where you are on the field. And those are things that Hendon Hooker did that turned Hendon Hooker into one of the biggest names in the SEC and for my money, a Heisman Trophy finalist. Should have been in New York City, even with a torn ACL. But because you're not going to have that run game that you did next year. But he was still a freshman, so let's give him a little bit of credit. Let's go ahead and say because of without having that run game, because of he was a first-year player, he can take that next step forward. You may also need your wide receivers to step on up. Because remember back in 2022, the Vols were an offensive juggernaut. If they would have made the college football playoff, I would have had high hopes for them to actually win multiple games. I would have had high hopes for them to potentially in a 12-team playoff format with what you had with Cedric Tillman, what you had with Ryan Keaton, what you had with Squirrel White, you would be very good. You would be in, for my money, probably one of the more explosive attacks, especially if you had a healthy Hendon Hooker. The last 2 seasons have been hit and miss of wide receiver and quarterback connections. And I'm not saying that they weren't trying, and I'm not saying that you didn't have help from Hendon Hooker, from Joe Milton or Nico making plays, but nobody was really taken over as that enforcer. And a lot of these guys are gone now. Dante Thornton's off to the NFL. Brit McCoy's out of eligibility. Squirrel White and Chaz Nimrod transferred this offseason. I have high hopes for Mike Matthews. I made this abundantly clear multiple times. I believe that Mike Matthews was the most slept-on wide receiver in its recruiting class. I think he was underutilized last year. Based off of practice reports, I'm very high on saying that the number 10 and number 8 connection will flourish next season. And you got Chris Brazzell back for round 2. And Braylon Stanley's looking to take on a bigger role. And Amari Jefferson joins the crew from Alabama. That's a very good route running prospect. And you brought in Travis Smith, who has high potential as a freshman. And you have multiple other players that are part of this 2025 class. So there's no reason to doubt that you can't find your number 1 receiver. But you got to find somebody this season. It may be Matthews, it may be Brazzell, but somebody has to be that enforcer. And I understand where Tennessee fans come from for right now because you're questioning everything. It's January. You ended your year on such a heartbreaking, sour note. You got some wins that were very close calls. You were known for the explosive passing attack. You only scored against a Power 4 opponent 30 points once this season. I get where you come from. But just remember this. It's January. Don't go to any foregone conclusions. Things are going to change in the next several months to where we don't know who's even going to be starting week 1 at certain schools. The transfer portal has a second window opening to where you can target multiple wide receivers or offensive linemen or defensive tackles and better your roster because of it. I understand that you feel a certain way right now because of what wasn't added in versus what was lost. But you got time. Time is sometimes the cruelest joke in all of the world. And sometimes it's a blessing in disguise. And for those who know that Josh Heupel is going 11-10 against top 25 teams or 4-5 against top 10 teams in his career, just let me bring you back to 2008. Because I've heard some people talk about how they're upset with what Heupel's done, how they're upset with how Heupel's handled things. And I'm like, okay, well, do you remember when Philip Fulmer stepped down and people thought that was the best thing to happen to the program? Well, BH, before Heupel, Tennessee never finished with more than 9 wins in a season. They missed 6 bowl games. They finished with 5 seasons of 3 wins or fewer in conference play, and they were only ranked inside the AP top 25 once. With Heupel in the program, they've gone 2 10-win seasons, a college football playoff berth, 3 straight finishes in the AP top 25 and college football top 25, and he signed on to the long term. So they're in a really, 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 really good spot, for my opinion. And best of all, people know what they can do. People have seen what the offense can look like, and they also understand that the defense, it may take a step back next year, but they also now know, hey, we got the right coordinator, Tim Banks. Banks did this last year. With a lot of players that are young, maybe some veterans that need a second chance, who's to say that he can't duplicate that success again? Who's to say that he can't turn the corner and be that guy once more? I'm not doubting it. I don't know why anybody would. Tennessee's going to be fine. Tennessee may end up going 9-3 next season. Tennessee may end up going 10-2 next season. They may end up winning the college football playoff for all I know because the culture is there. Doubting Josh Heupel at your own risk is up to you. I refuse to do that. I refuse to play into that nonsense and that tomfoolery. I believe that Tennessee will be just fine next season. Go ahead and have all your questions going into the offseason. I'm not going to doubt you on that for any means whatsoever. What I will tell you is if you let something marinate, you let something breathe, eventually, by the end of the day, you're in a pretty good spot. I think Tennessee's in the right spot moving forward. All you got to see is somebody step on up at wide receiver, somebody step on up on the offensive line, and make sure that Nico continues to grow. All that aside, Volunteers will be right back in the hunt for the college football playoff. We have been going for almost an hour now. I got to get on out of here, but real quickly, make sure that you like the video, hit the ring notification, subscribe to the channel. That way you keep up to date with everything that we're doing with college football and nothing but college football. Give me a date in the comment section as well. What day would you want to do a Q&A? We'll do like 30 minutes on like a Tuesday or a Wednesday. I just want your opinion on that. Like, review, hit subscribe. Make sure that you're following us on all the social channels, TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter at SEC Unfiltered. Follow me at Mr. Cole Thompson and check out all of our great work found at SECUnfiltered.com. That does it for me. Ladies and gentlemen, I promise you college football is right around the corner. Just close your eyes and pretend to take a long nap. Soon enough, you'll be back in fall season. Peace.